The sound did not belong to the ship. Rail had worked aboard the Aurelian Drift for 3 years, and in that time he had memorized every sound the vessel made. The low hum of the oxygen recyclers, the distant clank of coolant pipes settling in deep space, the soft rhythm of the ventilation fans in the lower decks. He knew all of it the way a person knows their own heartbeat. So when he heard something else, a faint, dry clicking, almost like a tiny set of claws tapping against metal, he stopped walking and listened. It was coming from Bay 7. Bay 7 was not a mystery on its own. It held uncatalogued specimen crates from the last survey stop, boxes of soil samples, preserved plant matter, geological cores from a moon that nobody had named yet. Rail was the ship's xenobotanist, so technically all of it was his problem eventually. He had been putting it off for 2 weeks. He pushed the bay door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. The clicking stopped immediately. Rail stood very still. The bay smelled like dust and sealed plastic. The crates were stacked neatly in rows, each one tagged with a yellow scan label. He swept his work light slowly across the room. One crate near the back wall was different. It was not sealed the same way the others were. The lid sat slightly off its base, and the scan tag on its side was one he did not recognize. Older format, no ship ID prefix. He walked to it and crouched down. He put his ear close. Silence. Then, after a long moment, the clicking came again, soft, hesitant, like whatever was inside had decided he was probably not a threat, but was not entirely sure yet. Rail straightened up. He looked at the crate. He looked at the door. He looked back at the crate. He opened it. For a second, he saw nothing but crumpled packing material and dark. Then a pair of eyes opened inside the darkness, silver, round, and enormous, catching his work light and throwing it back like 2 small moons. Rail did not move. The creature stared at him. He stared at the creature. It was small, smaller than he expected something with silver eyes to be. It was roughly the size of a large house cat, curled into a tight ball, its tail wrapped all the way around its body and tucked under its chin. Its scales were blue and gold. Not painted, not printed, but genuinely blue and gold, shifting between the 2 colors the way oil shifts on water. Its wings were pressed flat against its back. They looked too big for its body, like a puppy that had not grown into its paws yet. It made the clicking sound again. Then it tilted its head at him. Rail's scientific brain said, Dravith youngling. Separated from clutch. Malnourished based on the dull patches on the scales near the spine. Non-aggressive body language. No raised wings. No bared teeth. Ears flat, but not pinned. His human brain said, it is very small, and it looks scared. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out the protein bar he had been saving for the end of his shift. He broke off a piece and held it out. The creature's nostrils moved. Its head tilted the other direction. Then, with enormous dignity, it uncurled itself, stretched its neck forward, and sniffed the piece of bar so carefully that Rail almost laughed. It ate it, chewed twice, swallowed, looked at him again. Rail gave it another piece. He stayed in Bay 7 for 2 hours. He brought water in a folded equipment tray. He sat on the floor with his back against the neighboring crate and just stayed there, not touching, not crowding, just present. The creature watched him for a long time. Then it moved out of the crate completely, walked across the floor in a slow, careful line, and settled down about 3 feet away from him, tucking its tail around itself again. It closed one eye, kept the other on him. Rail turned off the overhead light and left only his small work lamp on so it would not be too bright. When he finally left, he closed Bay 7 behind him and stood in the corridor for a moment, thinking. He should report this. There was a clear and obvious protocol for undocumented fauna aboard a colony vessel. Navigator Bren would want to know immediately. Science Officer Daya would want to run a full bio-containment check. The ship's medical AI would want to quarantine the bay. Rail went back to his quarters and opened his journal instead. He sat down at his desk. He picked up his pen. He wrote the date at the top of the page, and then beneath it he wrote, Found something in Bay 7. Not sure what I've started. He closed the journal. He went to the kitchen block, collected 2 more protein bars, a folded thermal sheet from the emergency supply locker, and a spare water container. He went back to Bay 7. The creature was still there, in the same spot, still watching the door as though it had known he would come back. It made the clicking sound once when it saw him. Just once. Like a greeting. Rail laid the thermal sheet out on the floor near the crate, set the water down, and broke off a piece of protein bar. He stayed until the creature fell asleep. It slept with its chin resting on the very edge of the sheet he had put down, touching the warmth of it, but not quite committing to it yet. Rail turned the light off and left. He did not report it. Not that night. 5 days passed before anyone found out. In those 5 days, Rail named the dragon nothing. He told himself it was because naming an alien specimen before full classification was scientifically irresponsible. This was true. It was also true that naming something made it harder to let go of, and Rail was not ready to decide yet whether he was keeping this problem or not. He brought food twice a day. He sat in Bay 7 during his off hours. By day 3, the creature had started following him from the crate to the water tray and back. By day 4, it had decided that sitting on top of Rail's knee while he read field reports was acceptable behavior. By day 5, it chirped at the bay door whenever it heard his footsteps in the corridor outside. So, there was that. It was Navigator Bren who discovered them, not because he was suspicious, but because he was tracking a power draw anomaly in Bay 7 and came to check the relay panel himself. He opened the door, stepped inside, looked at Rail sitting on the floor with a small blue-gold dragon asleep across his boots, and stood completely still for 11 full seconds. Then he said, "Rail." "I know," Rail said. "That is a Dravith youngling sitting on your feet." "I know." There are 17 active regulations that apply to this situation. I counted 16, but I may have missed one. Bren pressed his fingers to his forehead. He was a practical man, good at logistics, bad at surprises. His expression cycled through several stages of feelings before settling on the look of a man who had already decided he was going to hate the next hour of his life. "How long?" he asked. 5 days. Bren closed his eyes. The dragon woke up at that point, looked at Bren with wide silver eyes, decided he was not interesting, and went back to sleep. "It's not dangerous," Rail said. "Watch the body language. Wings completely relaxed, no defensive posturing. It's been eating standard protein rations without any adverse reaction. I've been monitoring its temperature, respiration rate, and... Rail, there is a dragon on your feet. A very small one." Science Officer Daya arrived 20 minutes later because Bren had called her, and unlike Bren, her first reaction was to pull a bioscanner out of her coat and crouch down with an expression of complete delight. "It's a juvenile," she said immediately. "Look at the wing-to-body ratio. It hasn't reached its second growth stage yet. Rail, do you know how rare it is to have a Dravith at this stage within scanning range?" "I had a feeling you would say something like that," Bren said flatly. The argument lasted 40 minutes. Bren cited regulations. Rail countered each one with specifics. Containment protocols already in effect, no biological contamination risk based on Daya's initial scan, no aggressive behavior in 5 days of close contact. Daya kept scanning the dragon and making small sounds of scientific excitement that were not helping the professional tone of the conversation. In the end, Bren agreed to a compromise, not because he was convinced, but because Rail had been calm and methodical and correct about every single regulation he cited, and Bren was a man who respected accuracy, even when it annoyed him. The dragon was logged officially as Xenofauna specimen, unclassified, under observation. It was relocated to Rail's quarters where it could be properly monitored. Daya would run weekly biochecks. If any health risk emerged, the situation would be reassessed immediately. Rail carried the creature to his quarters in a specimen crate with the lid open. It sat up straight the whole way and watched the ship's corridor slide past with great interest. He set the crate down beside his desk. The dragon stepped out, walked a slow circle around the room, investigated the corner where Rail kept his boots, sniffed the underside of the desk chair, and then jumped onto the desk itself and sat directly on top of his open journal. "That's mine," Rail told it. It chirped once and stayed exactly where it was. He fed it dinner. He did his end-of-day reports with the dragon sitting on the desk beside him, occasionally pressing its nose to the edge of his data tablet. When Rail dimmed the lights and got into his bunk, the dragon settled on the floor below. Rail had been asleep for perhaps 3 hours when something warm pressed against his chest and woke him. He opened his eyes. The dragon had climbed up and was sitting on him, which was less alarming than it sounds because it weighed almost nothing. But that was not the part that made Rail stop breathing for a moment. In its front claws, held out toward him with the specific, careful posture of something being offered, was a small sphere of light. It was warm gold. It was about the size of a marble. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. The dragon nudged it closer. Rail looked at it for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he held out his hand. The dragon placed the sphere in his palm. It was warm, not hot. Warm, in the way a smooth stone is warm after sitting in sunlight. It pulsed against his skin, steady and soft. He held it up and looked at it in the dark of his quarters, and it lit his face like a tiny lantern. He had no idea what it was. He set it on the shelf above his bunk, between his plant specimens and his spare stylus. The dragon watched him do this. Then it climbed down off his chest, walked to the foot of the bunk, curled into a ball, and went to sleep. Rail lay in the dark and stared at the small gold light glowing on his shelf. "Okay," he said quietly. To no one. To the dark. To whatever strange thing was happening in his life. He went back to sleep. By the 11th night, the shelf above Rail's bunk looked like someone had scooped a handful of stars out of the sky and set them in a row. 11 spheres, each one slightly different. One was a cooler blue-white. One had a faint green edge to its glow. One pulsed faster than the others like it was in a hurry to be seen. The first one, the warm gold, still sat at the far left where he had placed it that first night. Rail had not moved any of them. He was not sure why. It felt wrong to rearrange them. The dragon, who Rail still had not officially named, though he had started calling him you, with enough specific warmth that it functioned as a name anyway, had settled fully into the rhythm of Rail's quarters. He slept at the foot of the bunk. He sat on the desk during work hours. He had developed a habit of pressing one small claw to Rail's wrist when Rail was reading for too long without moving, as if to check that he was still alive. He brought one sphere every single night, always around the same time, somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, always presented the same way, held out carefully in both front claws, wings slightly raised, eyes on Rail's face until Rail took it. Dia had asked to study one. Rail let her take the blue-white one, the fourth one, on the condition that she returned it. He was not sure why the return mattered to him. It just did. She came back 2 days later with her scanner notes and the sphere and an expression that meant she had found something that made her want to sit down. "It's organic," she said. "Crystalline organic structure, but the base material is biological." It came from him. Rail had already suspected that part. He had watched the dragon make one 3 nights ago. He had been lying in his bunk pretending to be asleep when he heard the small sounds of the dragon moving, and through barely open eyes he had watched it settle in the center of the floor, curl its tail around itself, and go very still. The stillness lasted a long time. Rail had almost actually fallen asleep when the light began, soft at first, just a faint warmth between the dragon's front claws, like the glow from cupped hands. It grew slowly, taking shape, condensing. It took about 10 minutes for the sphere to fully form. The dragon had held it for a moment after it was done, just held it, the way you might hold something before you decide to give it away. Then it had walked to the bunk and woken Rail up to take it. "The internal structure is not random," Dia continued, spreading her scanner readout across the desk. "Look at this. These frequency bands, they repeat in patterns. It's not just light, Rail. It's organized, layered. These sections here look almost like, I don't have the right word, encoded. The way a signal is encoded." Rail looked at the readout. He had been looking at it in his mind for 2 days already, turning it over, sitting with the feeling that the spheres were not just pretty objects, that they were trying to be something. "Have you cross-referenced with anything in the xenobiology database?" he asked. "I ran everything we have on Dravith biology, which isn't much. They don't exactly invite study. But there's one old survey paper, about 60 years old, that mentions Dravith adults carrying what the researcher called light nodes internally. No analysis, just an observation. He said they appeared to hold them near their core, and that removing one seemed to cause distress." Rail looked at the shelf. 11 spheres. "He's been making them," Rail said, from inside himself. "Yes." "Every night." "Yes." Rail was quiet for a moment. Does it hurt him? Dia checked her notes. No adverse readings after production. Heart rate returns to baseline within minutes. No weight loss. No stress markers. Whatever it costs him, it doesn't seem to be physical. She left the sphere and went back to her lab. Rail sat at his desk for a long time after she left. The dragon was asleep on the chair beside him, one wing draped over the armrest. The shelf glowed softly in the background, 11 small heartbeats of light in the dark. He picked up his journal and turned to the page where he had been sketching each sphere. He had drawn them carefully. The shape, the color, the direction the pulse moved, whether it was fast or slow. He had been treating them like specimens, like things to describe from a distance. He looked at his sketches now and felt something shift in how he understood them. He pulled the journal closer and wrote underneath the drawings, "They are not random. They are not decoration. Each one is different. Each one is made deliberately. He makes them in stillness, alone, in the middle of the night, and then he brings them to me." He put his pen down. He looked at the shelf again. "Why?" He wrote at the bottom of the page. "What is he trying to give me?" From the chair beside him, the dragon opened one silver eye, looked at him, and closed it again. Rill did not sleep that night. He sat with the 11 small stars and his unanswered question until the ship's lights shifted to the pale gray of early morning cycle, and then he made tea and sat some more. He still did not have an answer, but he had the feeling, settled and certain in the quiet of his quarters, that the answer was already there on the shelf, waiting for him to be ready to understand it. Dia knocked on his door at 0630 on a Tuesday, which was unusual for her, because she was not a morning person and she knew Rail was not either. He opened the door with his tea still in hand. She was holding her data tablet against her chest with both arms, the way she held things when she was trying to contain herself. "I figured it out," she said. He stepped aside to let her in. The dragon lifted its head from the foot of the bunk, looked at Dia, decided she was familiar enough to not be alarming, and put its head back down. Dia sat at the desk. She laid the tablet flat and pulled up a three-dimensional rendering of the sphere's internal frequency structure, the layered bands of signal she had been working through for the past several days. Next to it, she pulled up a second image, a long-range biological scan of a Dravith adult, taken years ago by a survey vessel and sitting and used in the Xenobiology archive. Inside the adult Dravith's core, visible in the deep scan, were structures identical to the spheres. "They carry them internally," Dia said. "The same structures, same layering, same frequency bands. And the bands, I finally found a comparison point." She swiped to the next screen. Neural memory encoding. "Rail, this is what memory looks like when it's physically..." Rail sat down slowly on the edge of his bunk. "They're memories," Dia said. She said it quietly because she understood what it meant. "The spheres. They're not light. They're not decoration. They're crystallized memories. Physical ones. He's been taking memories out of himself and giving them to you." The room was very still. Rail looked at the shelf. 12 spheres now. The 12th had arrived just last night. A deep amber color that pulsed slow and warm. 12 nights. 12 memories. "Which memories?" he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. "I can't read the content. The scanner can see the structure but not the meaning, like seeing a book's pages without knowing the language. But based on the pattern density and the emotional frequency markers, these aren't distant memories. Old childhood things stored away. These are recent, strong, high emotional weight." Rail stood up. He crossed the room to the shelf. He stood in front of it and looked at all 12 spheres glowing in their row. 12 different colors, 12 different pulses, 12 pieces of something the dragon had been carrying inside him and had chosen, every single night, to take out and hand over. He reached for the first one, the warm gold, the very first night. The moment his fingers closed around it, something moved through him, not a vision, not words, not anything he could describe exactly. More like weather. A sudden, specific feeling, warmth in the chest, the particular easing of a fear that had been quietly present, the sensation of being found after being lost without knowing you were lost. His hand was shaking. He had felt that before. He knew exactly when he had felt that before. It was a feeling that belonged to the moment in Bay 7, when Rail had sat down on the floor with his back against a crate and simply stayed. When he had not grabbed, not prodded, not made noise. When he had just been there. The dragon had been in that crate for however long, scared, cold, alone in the middle of deep space. And then a human had opened the lid and sat down on the floor with him. And this sphere was what that felt like from the other side. Rail set it down very carefully. He turned around and sat on the floor with his back against the shelf, which was perhaps not dignified but was necessary because his legs had decided they were done. He breathed for a while. Just breathed. The dragon raised its head. It watched him. Then it climbed down from the bunk, walked across the floor, and stepped into Rael's lap without any ceremony, turning twice and settling with its tail tucked under and its chin resting on Rael's knee. Rael put one hand on the dragon's back very gently. The scales were warm and smooth under his fingers. He looked up at the shelf. 12 small lights, 12 memories, 12 moments from inside a creature that had been lost and frightened and had somehow, in the middle of all that, found enough safety to feel things worth remembering, and had trusted Rael with every single one. He said, very quietly, to the top of the dragon's head, "You were alone for a long time, weren't you?" It was not a question. He knew the answer. He looked at his journal on the desk. He looked at the shelf. Then he got up slowly, the dragon shifting but staying close, and he went to the desk and opened the journal to the page of sphere sketches. He drew a small mark next to each one. Not a label yet, just a mark to show that he knew, that he understood now what he was holding. He wrote at the bottom of the page, "He did not give me stars. He gave me the things that mattered enough to keep. And then he decided I was worth giving them to." He closed the journal. He sat in the quiet of his quarters with 12 memories glowing behind him and a small dragon leaning against his leg, and he stayed there for a long time, because sometimes the only right response to being trusted that completely is to simply be present for it. The proximity alert did not sound like a threat. It sounded like a fact, a single long tone from the navigation deck, measured and flat, followed by Bren's voice over the ship-wide channel saying, "All crew, we have an unscheduled contact. Large class. Please remain calm." Rael was at his desk when the alert came. The dragon looked up from its place on the chair beside him, ears forward, nostrils working. Rael pulled up the external feed on his tablet. It was visible even on the small screen. A Dravith warship, and calling it that was like calling a mountain a hill. It was enormous in a way that made the Aurelian drift feel like a leaf floating beside a building. Its hull was deep blue-black with natural bioluminescent markings running in long patterns down its sides. Not painted, not mechanical, grown there, the way a tree grows rings. It moved with the slow certainty of something that had never needed to hurry. It was simply there, alongside them, keeping pace. The dragon stood up on the chair. It made a sound Rael had not heard before, long and low, starting in its chest and traveling upward, almost too deep to register as sound and more as a pressure in the room. Rael looked at the dragon. The dragon looked at the ship on the screen. Communication was established 17 minutes later. Dia handled the translation because the Dravith did not speak in words. They transmitted in frequency patterns, dense and layered, which Dia had spent the last week learning to read. She came to find Rael in his quarters. She sat down. She told him the ship belonged to an elder named Varun, the dragon's great-grandmother, that she had been searching since an ion storm had separated the youngling from the clutch during a survey passage through this sector, that she was not hostile, that she was requesting the return of the youngling. And then Dia said, "She wants to speak with the human who kept him." Bren looked at Rael. Dia looked at Rael. Rael looked at the dragon, who was sitting on the floor pressed against his leg. The communication was done through Dia, translating both ways, with the frequency patterns converted into rough words that Varun was patient enough to accept even when they were imprecise. The first thing Varun said, translated, was not a greeting. It was a question. "How many Veil did the youngling leave with you?" 12, Rael said. The response from the warship took longer than the translation should have required. When it came, Dia read it slowly, as though she was making sure she had it right. She says, "In our recorded history, no Dravith youngling has ever given 12 Veil to a being outside the clutch. Not in any record we hold. Adults, occasionally, will give 1 or 2 to a bonded mate. Younglings give them only to their clutch mates, and rarely more than 3 or 4 in the first months of life." Dia paused. She says 12 is. The word she used translates closest to impossible, but it doesn't mean she disbelieves it. It means she's never encountered it. Rael sat with that for a moment. The dragon pressed harder against his leg. Vern asked, "What did you do for him?" Rael thought about Bay 7, about sitting on the floor in the dark, about protein bars broken into small pieces, about not grabbing, not crowding, not filling the silence with noise. I sat with him, Rail said. I fed him. I let him sleep near me. I tried not to scare him. Diet translated. The response came back. She says, you made him feel safe enough to remember joy. Nobody in the room spoke for a moment. Then Varun transmitted something longer. Dia translated it in pieces as it came. The veil are not gifts in the way your kind uses that word. They are not objects. They are pieces of the self, moments of feeling that are real enough to crystallize. A Dravith gives a veil only when the feeling inside it is too important to hold alone. When they trust someone else to carry part of what they are. That your youngling gave you 12? This is not sentiment. This is the deepest form of recognition our kind knows. He told you, 12 times, that he trusted you with the parts of himself that mattered most. Rail looked at the shelf. The 12 spheres glowed in their row, small, steady, impossibly bright in the dim room. The arrangements for transfer were made carefully. A shuttle would bring the dragon across to the warship. Rail had 1 hour. He spent it in his quarters. He did not do anything dramatic. He sat on the floor, the same way he had sat on the floor in Base 7, and the dragon climbed into his lap and stayed there while Rail talked. He said things he knew could not be understood linguistically. He said them anyway, because the saying of them mattered. He said, you were so scared in that crate. He said, I think you made me less lonely than I knew I was. He said, I am keeping these. Every single one. I am keeping all 12. When the hour was done, Rail carried the dragon to the shuttle bay himself. At the door, the dragon turned its head back and made the sound again. The low one, the deep one, the one that was more pressure than noise, that the instruments later reported as a new and unclassified frequency emanating from within the ship. Rail had never heard that sound from any living thing before. He did not have words for what it meant. He suspected that was the point. Some things were too important for words. He stood at the bay door and watched the shuttle cross the dark between the two ships, a small light moving toward a vast one, until the warship's bay opened and received it. Then he went back to his quarters and sat in front of 12 glowing spheres and did not say anything at all. 3 days after the warship left, Rail still had not moved the spheres. He had moved everything else. He had reorganized his plant specimens, updated his field logs, cleaned the desk, returned the borrowed scanner equipment to Dia's lab. He had done all of it with the particular focused energy of a person who is keeping themselves busy so they do not have to feel something completely. The spheres stayed where they were. 12 in a row, still glowing, still pulsing, softer now, or maybe he just noticed them more when the room was quiet. On the 4th day, Dia came by with her tablet and a message. Varun sent a final transmission before they made the FTL jump, she said. She read it directly from the screen. The veil do not fade. What he gave you will hold his light until your kind stops counting stars. Guard them as he guarded you. Rail read it twice over her shoulder. Then he went and sat in front of the shelf. Dia left without saying anything else. She was good at knowing when to leave. He picked up the first sphere, the warm gold one. He held it in his palm and let the feeling move through him again. Warmth. The specific relief of not being alone. The other side of a moment that he had thought was simple, just a man sitting quietly on a cargo bay floor, and that had apparently been something else entirely to the small, frightened creature watching him. He set it down and picked up the second one. This one felt like movement, like the first time the dragon had walked across the bay floor toward him on his own, unasked, unhurried, closing the distance by choice. He picked up the third, the feeling of sound, his voice, and being listened to even without understanding. He went through all 12. He sat on the floor with his back against his bunk, and he held each one, and he stayed with what it gave him. By the time he reached the 12th, the amber one, slow pulsing, deep and warm, he had been sitting there for almost 2 hours. His tea had gone cold on the desk behind him. The ship's lighting had shifted from midday to evening cycle. He opened his journal. He turned to the page with the 12 sketches. He looked at them for a long time. 12 careful drawings, each one slightly different, made on 12 different nights when he had still thought he was documenting specimens. He picked up his pen. He wrote a name next to the first sketch, the protein bar. He wrote next to the second, the first walk across the floor. Next to the third, the sound of my voice in the dark. He kept going. He wrote a name for all 12, as carefully as he could, not what they were scientifically, but what they felt like. What memory of his they matched, viewed from the other side. He tried to think about what the dragon must have been holding on to. What moments, from inside that experience, had been strong enough to crystallize. He reached the last one and wrote, "The hour before the shuttle, when we sat on the floor and I talked, and he stayed." He put the pen down. He looked at the 12 entries. They were all moments that had felt small to him at the time. Quiet moments. Unremarkable acts of being present and decent and not making things worse. Feeding a frightened creature. Sitting still. Not leaving. He had not thought any of it was significant. The dragon had thought all of it was worth keeping forever. He was still sitting there when Bryn appeared in his doorway, looking uncomfortable in the way that Bryn looked uncomfortable when he was about to say something that required feelings. "The crew," Bryn said. "We were talking. At dinner. About the dragon." "All right," Rail said. "We want to log something in the navigation charts. Officially, there is a small unnamed star cluster about 2 days back, in the region where the ion storm was, where he must have been separated." Bryn stopped. Started again. "We want to name it. In the official charts. If that is acceptable to you." Rail looked at him. "Why would it need to be acceptable to me?" Bryn was quiet for a moment. "Because you're the one he gave everything to," he said simply. It seemed right to ask. Rail looked at the shelf. 12 small lights in a row, holding 12 pieces of something irreplaceable. "Yeah," he said. "Do it." The name went into the charts the next morning, entered by Bryn with the same calm, methodical precision he used for everything, as though it were any other navigation record and not a small act of respect given to a creature who would never know about it. Solon's Reach. A cluster of 12 stars in the survey logs of the Aurelian Drift, orbiting a dim yellow sun in an unremarkable corner of deep space. 12 stars. It was not a coincidence. The crew had counted the spheres on the shelf and matched the number deliberately. Rail found out about this later and did not say anything about it because there was nothing to say that would have been adequate. The Aurelian Drift moved on through deep space, forward, as ships do, as time does, carrying its crew and its cargo and 12 glowing spheres on a shelf in the xenobotanist's quarters. In Rail's journal, 12 entries. 12 names for 12 feelings that a small creature had trusted him to hold. Somewhere far behind them, a Dravith warship moved through the dark with a youngling safe inside it, carrying whatever it carried now. The same memories, perhaps, but lighter for having been shared. Out between the stars, the Dravith had a saying that translated poorly into most languages, but survived the journey well enough. Memory is not what you keep. It is what you give to someone who will hold it better than you can alone. Humanity, it turned out, was very good at holding things. They had been practicing for a long time.